I'm Connie Marshall. I have been a member of Northaven for about 12 or 13 years now. Love it. It is just an amazing place. So we'd like to start off by learning about you and just your story and how you landed in Dallas, and just tell us about yourself.
Okay. So I grew up in Fort Worth, and my parents were very conservative, very, very religious, and I grew up at University Baptist Church on the TCU campus. And so I grew up with, a lot of religion, but a lot of really conservative religion. And then I'm just going to give you the long version because it's too complicated to leave stuff
We
out.
have all the time in the world. No problem.
So I went to Baylor because that's where everybody went, and it was really at Baylor that I took religion, which was required, and where I first learned that that there were Christians and that there were Baptists who did not believe the Bible literally, which made so much sense to me because I was always getting in trouble in Sunday school all the time growing up for saying that doesn't make any sense. That just doesn't make any sense. And my parents would say, Shannon, you don't upset the Sunday school teachers, be sweet, be nice, be compliant. And I was very compliant, but I just never made sense to me. So I transferred to UT, and my mother, who had grown up in Jean, Texas, which is outside of Graham, so she was they were very small town people. She told me that she would have a nervous breakdown if I transferred to that city of sin. But somehow by the time my little baby brother went to architecture school there 12 years later, it was a perfectly fine university. Not a perfectly fine university when I was 19 and I transferred there. So after I graduated with an art history degree, then I went to work in Dallas because we were very poor and I was paying for school myself, and I had been accepted into a library science graduate program, but I just thought, why should I do this? I'll never pay anything off. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do anyway. So I actually worked for a real estate developer here in Dallas for 5 years and kind of trying to find myself. And while I was there, I met a lady that I worked with who had worked in Saigon during the Vietnam War with the U.S. Information Agency. And so I said, now that sounds like something interesting. That appeals to me. So I applied, and it was a long, long, long process because of security clearances and all of that. But I was accepted, and in the meantime, I had met my husband, and so he went with me as my dependent spouse. And we were in Washington for a while, and then we moved to Islamabad, Pakistan, which was my choice because there were excellent opportunities for him to work, and it just sounded interesting to me. And you can imagine about this time, my little country parent, that Southern Baptist country parents' heads exploding. And I actually had a baby while I was there, and she's the Catherine that joined the church with us.
Uh-huh.
And there was all kinds of, civil unrest and, stuff that is like what's going on here right now. But it was absolutely fascinating. It was really, really, really interesting. And the U.S. Information Agency doesn't even exist anymore, but what they did at that time were we used to call it like the public relations branch of the State Department. Mm-hmm. And we would be in the American centers, not in the embassy, although now I think that's all changed because of security. And we did all of the interactions with the foreign journalists, which of course there were millions of them there right at that time. And we did cultural exchange programs, and it was just really, really interesting. So we were there for 3 years, and then we wanted to stay, but I had already applied for a job, which I was forced to apply for another job early in Yaoundé, Cameroon. And they could not get anybody to go to Yaoundé, Cameroon in 1989 because of AIDS in West Africa. Mm. So we had to go there. And we were not as happy there. And I don't think it was any fault of the country. I think it was just, stuff that was going on with us personally. But we ended up not staying for 3 years and kind of flipping careers. And my ex-husband, who's a member of Preston Hollow Presbyterian, which is where we got married, actually, right down the street, he went back into the oil business. And I stayed home with the kids for a couple of years, which is what I really, really wanted to do. And then when they were 2 and 4, I started teaching 2-year-old preschool, which was completely different, and I loved it. And then after maybe 5 or 6 years, I decided that I was really interested in developmental psychology and that I would go back and get my master's in developmental psychology, which I started, but then there was a much better counseling program at the University of Houston than the developmental psychology program. So I actually ended up getting my master's in counseling. And then I was working at the VA hospital. I had worked at another psychiatric hospital, and I really liked working with extremely psychotic people. I didn't really like working with, just mildly depressed. My uncle was schizophrenic and had lived and died in the Wichita Falls State Hospital before deinstitutionalization. So those are just the people that I find, super, super interesting. But when we got divorced and my ex-husband moved to El Dorado, Arkansas, because that's where Murphy Oil was, and I was single parenting, which I had not really anticipated when we first talked about divorce. I was in a couple of really bad takedown situations, and I was really far away from where the kids were in school at the VA hospital. And I just realized, this is not sustainable. I can't do this as a single parent. So I quit and found another job as a proposal writer at a software company. And it was in between the kids' schools, so I could actually take Catherine to band practice and then go back to work and then take her to swim practice. And they were extremely flexible. And that really saved my life, and that's what I'm still doing now. 20 years later, I worked for that company for a long time, and then I went to work for Maersk Oil, and then the oil business went bad, and then I started working for Jacobs Engineering in Houston. This was all in Houston, where we had landed after Africa. And about a year ago, I really started thinking, why am I in Houston? One of my daughters, the younger daughter, is in Dallas, and she really needs me. And Catherine and Chad were in Mexico, and you don't need to be in Houston for Mexico. And so I started thinking about moving and selling my house and moving up here close to where Allison was building a house. And so that's how I got here. And I transferred with Jacobs, working downtown and taking the train, which that's all, really up in the air at this point, how that's going to work out. But they've been really, really good company to work for in this crisis. We have a new CEO a few years ago who's really about diversity and about making it someplace where kids want to come after college, and they've been. We're all just working from home indefinitely, and there's no pressure at all.
So how long ago was that? How long ago did you move to Dallas?
1 year.
Oh, just 1 year. Okay.
Just 1 year. So I hadn't lived here. This is kind of an embarrassing a part of the story, that I hadn't lived in Dallas since 1986. 85 or 86. And so all of these years that I have been living in Houston, and there's this huge rivalry between Dallas and Houston. Mm-hmm. And all of these years I've been saying, well, I didn't really like Dallas because blah, 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 here's my points. And then I moved here because of my daughter, and I'm expecting for it to be the same. And then feeling like a real idiot because it's been 30 years and it's not remotely the same. Mm-hmm. Nothing about it is the same, and it's so incredibly diverse, and it's so much more culturally interesting. And I've been really, really delighted with work, with neighbors, with everywhere I go. I feel so much more at home than I ever expected to. And then when we started, I had not gone to a church for about 20 years. After we got divorced, my ex-husband kind of got the church in the divorce, as happens, even though I had sung in the choir for 10 years and felt very embedded. And, I had tried to find other churches, really made a lot of different attempts, mm-hmm. and unsuccessfully. So Catherine, they ended up here, which was just a marvelous miracle. They were interviewing all over the world, and then they said, hey, there's some great schools they do IB education. So International Baccalaureate program. And there's tons of those here right now, which they hadn't expected. So that's how Chad got the job here. So sort of thinking about the grandkids, and and we all wanted to meet people. We all wanted to have a community, something that none of us had in a really long time. And so I really just started I'm really good at Google stalking and research. It's part of what I do for my job. And so I started doing all of this research, and I started a conversation with Craig about this church, because I didn't want to visit a million churches with the kids who had just been rooted. And I thought that would be really disruptive for them, not for me, but for them. And started a conversation. And then really the minute that we walked in the doors of Northaven, we were all like, oh my gosh. It just felt comfortable and felt accepted and felt at home in a way that we had not felt for maybe ever at a church.
Mm-hmm. It's really funny. That story I hear over and over and over. And I'm the same way. It's exactly how I felt when I walked in the door, but I've heard numerous people say that exact same thing. So there's just something in the air.
It's like there's something in the air.
Yeah.
I don't know. Here's an analogy. I always feel that way when I drive over the border to New Mexico. I always say that New Mexico, the light is different. Literally, you drive over the border and you're like, ooh, yeah. That's how I felt walking in the doors of Northaven.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. That's great. Well, we're just so thrilled that all of you are there, and I've so enjoyed Kat and Chad's interview, and those girls. Oh my goodness. You must be one really, really proud grandma. Oh, they are just
I just feel so unexpectedly blessed to be able to see them on a day-to-day basis, because when Savannah was born, they were in Peru, and then when Sierra was born, they were in Mexico. And that's just, you marry an international school teacher, and that, she would say, I want to come home to Texas. And I would say, you married an international school teacher, that's what you can't make somebody change careers. That's what you signed up for.
Exactly.
So, I'm just really surprised and delighted to be able to see them this often, and having been kind of quarantined together in our little pod. I can't even imagine how I would have felt in Houston, because really the last straw in Houston was being by myself, really, really by myself during Harvey. And I lived on the bayou, so really, my house didn't flood, but my yard did, and a lot of neighbors did, and feeling really, really alone. So then that was just a tiny sliver of what this has been. And so I'm just so grateful to have a church, doing the virtual Sunday school, and to feel embedded, which really we just barely got in before COVID started.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how hard would I have to twist your arm to join the choir once we're singing?
I think that I will eventually. I didn't want to do it too quickly, and I wasn't so sure about the work thing, having a weekly obligation. I haven't done that in a long time, but I think I eventually would like to.
Well, it could actually be quite a while before we actually sing anyway.
True.
So you've got lots of time, I'm afraid, to make that decision, because
But eventually I would. There's, singing is so therapeutic, and something that I really lost because of not being in a church for a long time. Right.
Well, you've touched a tiny bit on kind of your faith, your spiritual journey. Is there any more you want to elaborate on about that?
Well, I think it says a lot that I didn't go to church for 20 years. How lost and alienated and unengaged with my own spirituality that I was. And so here's a piece of really personal information that I don't mind sharing, though. I have been sober for 15 years. And so a good part of the unchurched, I guess you would say, time was I was drinking. So those kind of correlate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when you get sober and you get sober in AA, and there is that spiritual component, then to not be able to really feel that you have any place to put that, except AA, which is, a really, really great program, but it's not church, right?
Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
anonymous, and it's not really a community. It's not the same thing.
Sure.
So I think that I have felt really extremely outside of church for a really long time. So when we were the church that we were members of for so long, and in Houston was St. Thomas Presbyterian Church. And really the reason that we joined that church was because it was one of the very few churches I've ever been a part of that did actively accept and embrace atheists and people who were looking and searching. Mm-hmm. And there was no shame to not being on the same, lockstep page with other people, even within that denomination. And I'm not saying I'm an atheist. I'm not an atheist, but I'm very much, I don't know where I am. I'm 60 years old and I don't know where I am. And I don't know that I'll ever know that I fit into a certain box, with Christianity. But with Northaven, I feel like I'm not being forced into a box that I don't fit into, which makes you much more able to engage and open up and share and be open to pieces that you thought maybe you had rejected. Rethink
I have found many more times than I could even count the number of times, particularly in my Sunday school class when we'll be having discussion, and I feel perfectly comfortable saying, I don't believe that. Mm-hmm. And there's no judgment, and there's no, you have to think this way. There's a lot of room for questioning and stepping outside the box. And I think the more you get to know people, you'll find that's exactly what you'll find at Northaven.
So I think if you had to say, where will you land? What do you see as your, career path? What do you see as your spiritual path? I have no idea, but I also have no idea. And it's kind of interesting saying, mm-hmm. In 5 years, I really may not be here. And that's kind of a good thing, because I have been in a little bit of a holding pattern mm-hmm. for a really long time now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, our time is already up. I just have thoroughly enjoyed spending this time with you, and I can hardly wait to meet you in person, and you and your whole family. With this quarantine stuff is getting really old.
It's really brutal.
I miss church so much. I just miss it so much. I miss all the people and the singing and everything. So I just pray that the day will come really soon and we'll all be back together again. So
maybe we'll just look back on it all as, I think of it kind of like a war, it does leave damage. It does leave loss. It does leave, it leaves everybody a little bit scarred, but in 1950, people could say, okay, but we got through it.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question, because, if you don't know this about Northaven, you're going to find it out really soon. We have a lot of artists, a lot of very creative, incredible artists. So I'm curious about the paintings behind you. Are any of those yours?
No, I'm not an artist, and I don't usually sit here. I have a chair that is in front of the kitchen, and then sometimes people make fun of me because the microwave is kind of on top of my head. I've tried so many different places in this house to find an ergonomic setup for work. Uh-huh. And so for you, I said, I'm going to move a laptop is a laptop. It can be moved. And I'm going to move this laptop over in front of something more picturesque. But no, I've just bought art all my life, never spent a whole lot of money on it, but and my parents did too. So no, I'm interested in the artistic community there at Northaven. Well, we didn't get to do the park thing.
You'll love getting to know. There's just so many creative, amazing people that you're just going to fit in perfectly. We just can't wait to get to know you better.
Well, I feel very, very accepted and really excited.
Good. Well, that's great. Well, thank you again so much for cutting up this little wedge of time for us. And I know everybody at Northaven is going to be super excited to get to know you better.
Okay,
thank,
thank you so much.
thanks
I can't
again.
wait.
Have a good day.